Okay. And he's got multiple certifications, and he's going to talk tonight about team leadership, values, and process for sustainable and continuous improvements. And some of the stories he told me when I was on the panel with Stephanie are amazing, and I think he's going to share some of those with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Thank you very much, Mark.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm Mark Hervol. I'm out here in Kirkland, Washington, which is outside of Seattle by about 15 minutes, depending on how you drive. However, I grew up in the Boston area in Andover, and I've lived in France and Japan and went to school in England and Australia. So if you want me to do the whole talk from this point on in an Australian accent, I could do that for you, but I prefer not to. But I've worked for a number of companies you recognize, Microsoft, Amazon, spent 10 years full-time at Microsoft and another 5 years contracting. And so this is going to be a talk about Agile, and I'll have to show you a couple of slides to explain kind of the principles of it. And, you know, as Ken asked, you know, segue that into more about management, and under those conditions, how do you manage people and you know, manage large projects and complication and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go through a few slides, and along the way I'll tell you a bunch of stories, as Ken very well knows. I'd like to say that part of the success of building a really good team is reflected in the fact that 2 of the team members found out I was giving the talk and asked if they could join because they want to watch me screw up. So I hope that you all get something out of it. And if you have questions, you know, don't worry about just stopping me and interrupting.
You are a presenter now, so.
All right, and there you go. There's the presentation.
Thank you.
So I wanted to say something about remote work first. In the last several years of my jobs, I have, on any given day, been in a virtual call with Hyderabad, Beijing, Rote, Germany, Paris, Prague in the Czech Republic, Maidenhead in the UK, London in the UK, any of the US time zones. And this has actually not been unusual. My whole career, dating back a long time, had a lot of remote work. A lot of people that we would connect to remotely and deal with very large projects like complete conversions of networking in a single meeting overnight. So people sometimes are a little surprised when I respond to mail at 4 a.m, but that's because I was actually up an hour earlier talking to Beijing. So that's kind of my life these days. And it didn't want to change. Okay, so pop quiz. And the whole idea of agility is we do the work that we do in incremental small steps that independently work, so that we can stop periodically and look at what we do and say, are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? Should we change direction? Or is this just never going to make it?
Hello. What are you doing?
So if somebody could mute.
He's talking about his virtual stuff.
No, I just
I'll do it from here.
All right.
Put it up yet.
Yeah.
So
Karen, I'm going to mute you.
Oh. Ugh, smells like something burning.
Karen, I can't find her on my list. Doggone it.
if you made me a presenter, maybe I can do it.
Wait, here she is. I'll mute her right now. Muted.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else?
All right. So here's a question for you all. Here are companies, a list of companies that later became companies that you probably know. So Hanafu the playing cards, there was a game called Never Ending, Audio Conformity, Bourbon, Rubber Boots. I will tell you one thing about Hanafu the playing cards. They are only sold in Japan. The game is only played at New Year's. So you have kind of like this limited population of only a single country and a very limited time slot in which people buy these cards. Each of these companies has become something else because partway through their history, they said, this isn't going to get us to the endpoint that we want to be at. We want to be more profitable. We want to be more interesting things. Anybody want to guess what any of these companies are? Not including the people who work with me who already know the answers. All right. Nintendo, Flickr, Twitter, PayPal, Instagram, and Nokia. I'm pretty sure you've probably all heard of most or all of them. And each of those companies, like I said, got to a point in their history and they said, we want to do something different. We want to pivot. And that's what we do on a more frequent basis in the work that I do. So part of what I do is teach a process, but a lot of what I do is once you get the process, then we work through how best to have that work within your team. And it's pretty flexible, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It's based on a thing called the Agile Manifesto, and it was created by about 17 developers somewhere like 2001. And they simplified it down to these 4 basic ideas. We are mostly concerned about individuals' interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. When we're not doing those 4 things, we're getting a little away from the idea of agility. And as it says below, while there's value in the items on the right, which I don't have it spread out, but for the lowercase stuff, we value that, but we value what's in bold case even more. So this is oftentimes misunderstood. So people will say, oh, I know Agile, we don't have to write any documentation. Well, no, it doesn't actually say you don't get to write any documentation. It says that you should probably not write huge manuals, rather try to make those as small as possible while getting the software done. So this is just the basics of the Agile Manifesto. One of those processes that you can do, the primary 2 are Scrum and Kanban, and I'll talk mostly about Scrum. It's a lightweight process based on empiricism. Empiricism is being able to make decisions based on data. One of those things about data is you have to tell me the truth. So if you're lying to me, I don't have data. And so the 3 fundamental pillars of this, and we'll come back to this again and again as I talk, are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. The transparency, like I said, if you really tell me, I used to say to my leads, if you tell me bad news before it becomes awful news, that's good. Like it's actually good news to hear bad news, because then I can fix it before it's terrible. So, we don't shoot our wounded. If you have something that's concerning, I really need to know it, because as we'll get to, part of my job is to be a servant leader, and that is to, accept information about where we are, good or bad, and figure out the best path through that.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
I was going to say, we learned that via culture training, because we found out that one of our vendors from overseas always wanted to please the customer, never wanted to say no. And we could not. And then when they crashed, they were like, well, we just didn't want to tell you. We didn't want to upset you. So everything you're saying now makes all the sense in the world, where it's better to hear it now. And that's what we had to tell. Better to tell us now before it's a disaster. So I love it. Sorry, go ahead.
That's fine. I'll give you a great example that came out of Microsoft in the early days. There was a thing called scheduled chicken. I referenced it recently at work. And scheduled chicken is where the developers know that the program managers are going to give them ridiculous timelines to finish things. And the program managers know that the developers are going to pad their stuff to give them extra time. And so those 2 sides lie to each other, and you spend weeks trying to get to the bottom of what's realistic and, how can we then communicate this? And both sides know the other side is lying. It's built into scheduled chicken. And it's like, you're both racing at each other, and at last minute, somebody's going to turn off, and you're just waiting for somebody to finally say, okay, we could get it done by that time, or, okay, we don't need all that stuff, or whatever. And honestly, there's weeks wasted. But what if you had a world in which people actually said, here, this is a realistic expectation of when we think we can get this done. And then the program manager says, okay, that's good. Let me work out a schedule that makes some sense. Then I think we're going to be releasing at this point, and that sounds good. You just eliminated weeks of time. So that's part of the transparency thing. As the two team members that are here know very well, we spend a fair amount of time trying to get the estimates on our work reasonably accurate for exactly this reason. And people learn quickly. I really want to know what the truth is. Tell me the truth. We can deal with that. Another example about transparency is in the last company I worked for, we all were Scrum Masters or coaches, and we were assigned a number of teams we had to work with. I knew that it was broken. I knew that some people weren't doing anything and other people were overloaded. Nobody wanted to face it. So I created, for those of you who know Mural, M-U-R-A-L, it's an online kind of whiteboard that you can use and everyone can interact with it. So at the start of the meeting for the entire Agile Operations Group, I put up a mural board. There were circles that represented everyone on the team. Within those circles were sticky notes that represented the teams they were assigned. The color of the sticky note represented how recently they had talked to them. If it was green, it was within 2 weeks. If it was yellow, it was within a month. If it was red, it was within 2 months. And if it was black, it means you hadn't talked to them in a long time and it didn't matter because the trail was cold. On the sticky was the name of the team and a number 1, 2, or 3, which indicated what their priority was in terms of how much you should be talking to them. So if you saw like a red sticky with a number 1 on it, that's a bad thing. If you saw a number 1 with a green sticky, that was a good thing. Now, having told you all just that, so every circle was a person and every sticky inside were the teams and their states. I guarantee you right now, if I pulled this board up, every single one of you would look at it and immediately go, that guy doesn't do anything. She must be overloaded. That's not even possible. And what is that guy doing? It would take you 2 seconds to look at it. And I don't even have to explain it to you. It's visual, it's obvious, it's, what do you know, transparent. The result of that was that my manager did everything she could to bury the truth of the fact that some of the people weren't doing any work. And one of the impacts of that was that I quit. So transparency is critical to me, to the point where I will quit a job because we cannot get work done if you aren't transparent. Inspection and adaptation, every 2 weeks, typically in Scrum, we stop and ask the question on 2 fronts. Is what we just produced and gave to stakeholders good? And we ask the stakeholders, tell us what you think. That's inspection. And they tell us what they do or don't like so that we can make some changes and move on with the next chunk of work. And then we also ask ourselves, in the process of getting there, how did we do? Can we improve our process? Can we improve our communications? So there's inspection and adaptation every 2 weeks at the level of the product and the process. So yeah, I had one other little comment about this whole transparency thing and dealing with my leads. So when I had leads, I told them, and I know Abaddon's heard this, if you come to my office with a problem, I throw you out. If you come to my office with a problem and a solution, I throw you out. If you come to my office with a problem and a solution and a statement you are going to be personally involved in that solution, you get to stay and we'll figure it out. Because the first two, the problem, like you elucidate a problem and you have a great solution, but you're not going to do anything about it, that's completely worthless. So I was really transparent with my leads. Like, I only want to talk to you when you're willing to fix a thing that you found. And, you know, they rose to the occasion on a regular basis, but I had to kind of go through that. And I skipped a slide. Okay, so these are the fundamental values that Scrum uses. In the last job that I had, and I wrote this in the preamble for me, which was I was working directly with teams as a Scrum Master, and then the company told me I had to back up and be more of a coach that kind of worked with more teams on a lighter level. And some teams fell apart. Some of the best teams fell apart very quickly, and others that you wouldn't have called out as particularly good rose to the occasion and they were excellent. And that really made me stop and say, what was the difference? If you approach Scrum and Agile as a process, you can get incremental improvement up to a certain point. But it is truly a mindset change that requires you to rethink so much of what you do in terms of how you develop things, about how you view people that work in your teams, all of those things. And so I realized that we didn't actually spend a lot of time with the values. And here they are: courage, focus, commitment, respect, openness. People that work with me find that I will periodically come back to them, specifically reference them and say, are we actually being open about this? Are we being respectful? Do we have true commitment? At the end of every 2 weeks, we do a planning for the next 2 weeks. And I'd like to have a point where we stop and say to everyone, are you as a member of this team willing to commit to complete everything we just said we were going to do? And it's not an individual commitment. It's, do you believe this team can get it done? For those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, you might have noticed that my most recent entry said, because I'm a Scrum Master and an Agile coach, my preferred pronouns are we and us. And the Scrum values, kind of reflect some of that as well. So what we found was, if we just did values, people didn't know how to get the work done. If we just did the process, they didn't really embrace it, and it wasn't sustainable. Those had to go together, and no pun intended, hand in hand, or hand in wrist, I guess is technically what it is, for that to work well. So Google, by the way, did a big project called Project Aristotle. If you're interested, you can find it in the New York Times Magazine. Just look for New York Times Magazine Project Aristotle, in which they went out to find what made the best teams that really worked well together, that had the highest output, quality stuff. And they, Google is an analytics company. They have lots of data. They ran their data through all sorts of sieves. They came up with a whole bunch of hypotheses, and every single one of them failed. It wasn't where you went to school, what your GPA was, how old you were, how much seniority. It was actually absolutely nothing about who they were. They could not find any correlation between high performing teams and the backgrounds of anybody. Didn't matter about the mix of men to women or anything. None of that came true. But, they're not going to let that one lie. So they pursued it further. And eventually they came to a decision that there were only two things that made for highly efficient teams within Google. One is, and I'm going to read you the exact definitions that came out of the article because I thought they were pretty funny. But the first one is that if you took a certain period of time, say a week, that everyone in the team generally talked about the same as everyone else. In other words, I might be in a meeting where I don't say very much because it just doesn't apply to me, but later I have a lot more to say. In general, if there's even distribution of conversation with all the team members, that's something that tends to point towards efficient teams. And the other one is that they actually care about each other. So when they ask the question of, how was your Thanksgiving? They actually really want to know how your Thanksgiving was. When someone is sick and they say, I'm sorry to hear that, is there anything that you can do, that we can do to help you? They really mean that, and they'll do it, right? And I truly believe that those are very important for teams. And part of the value, or part of the role of a Scrum Master or a coach, is to show that concern and truly care about the people in the team, which I really do. I mean, there are people that I have been the Scrum Master for that are friends for life. I will always be in contact with them because I really enjoy working with them. Now, the definitions. So one of them was equality and distribution of conversational turn taking. That meant that everybody got to say something during a given week. And the other was high average social sensitivity. So we care about each other. Makes me think of the Army definition of circadian deregulation instead of having to say that somebody died. I think we can just get down to the statement, which is, yes.
What was that military term for when somebody dies? I never hear that again.
Circadian deregulation.
Regulation. I don't
Right.
want to laugh at that. Sounds terrible.
I did not make that up. That is one of my favorites. All right, so next slide, and I won't go into too much detail here, but behind the values are also some fundamental principles of Agile. You know, we welcome change, we deliver fairly frequently, we try to keep things simple, we self-organize, face-to-face conversations. I want to make a particular comment about that. In the last team I was in, like I said, there were people spread all over the globe that were part of our team, and our meetings in the mornings were all virtual. And one of the women in Roth, Germany said, you know, two of us or three of us in the Seattle office worked really well together because we were physically located near each other, and that was convenient. And I said, as of right now, every single one of you is the exact same distance from me, as in from here to the screen, because no matter, the time zone is different, but you are actually the same distance from me. So if you're telling me you don't have access to me, that's nonsense. And one of the things that I would do periodically is I would just send out a general meeting for hours on end, turn on my camera and mic and just leave it on and do work. And anyone could just drop in at any point, say, hey, can I ask you a question? Or, hey, by the way, how about them Mariners? Or, and this one's topical, don't you feel good that the Washington State Cougars beat the absolute crap out of the UW Huskies? Like, yes, actually, I do appreciate that one. But I just kept my mic and camera on. And then it was really like you're in the office, you can just talk to people. So you can still have a face-to-face. Interesting research shows that virtual teams versus co-located teams actually that's again has no impact on the productivity of a given team, at least in the software industry. People are used to this. In case in point, I have never met Abedin or Adam, the two people in this call, or anyone else that I've worked with for over a year. But I have written recommendations on LinkedIn and things like that because I certainly know them well enough. So anyway, I'm going to kind of base the background on what we're going to talk about on the 8 stances of a Scrum Master. This is out of a document you can get from scrum.org, which interestingly is called the 8 stances of a Scrum Master. So I've borrowed liberally from it. The first one is a servant leader. And the idea of a servant leader goes back to kind of what I said in my preamble about the head maid in Gosford Park. You know, I am there to help others get through their daily work. And whatever I can do to speed that up is part of my job. There's a difference, and we'll get to this, but there's a difference between a block and an impediment. A block is something that's kind of on an individual basis, and I can help with that, but my job has more to do with impediments, which are more broader in nature and impact the team in a broader way. One of the things I'm doing right now is just trying to simplify some of the workflows that we use on a daily basis. That's appropriate for the job that I do. Don't assume that servant leader means slave or scribe or lackey. I'm there to remove problems that they have and do it in a way that helps others. So the kinds of things, you know, I don't lead by title. There was a case in which I told some people, when I was at Microsoft, we were negotiating with Hewlett Packard. They were not doing what they were supposed to. I said, I will arrive 10 minutes late to this meeting. Do not address me or recognize me. Don't say a thing. And we will fix this problem. We had been going back and forth for 2 months with these guys. So I arrived and I sat down and they just kept on with the meeting. And I listened for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then I called out somebody in the meeting and I said, how would I have any evidence this occurred? And she said, oh, you know, I send out minutes every day. And I said, you do not. I'm certain of that. I get them. And you do not send them out every day. And they have no value because they tell us nothing and you've made no progress. How are you fixing this? And I kind of held her to the fire until the manager said, we promise we'll fix this. What do you want? And then I just told him what we wanted. And he said, we will do it. We will start tomorrow on this. I was absolutely the lowest level person in that room, but they didn't know it. Nobody asked my title. Nobody asked me what I did. they just didn't like the questions I asked and the implications of it. So, I don't lead by the title. I lead by what I'm trying to accomplish, which is let's unblock this thing so we can, in this particular case, the mean time to failure for something was measured in hours. It should be years, not hours. And we hadn't fixed that problem. So sometimes you have to do that. And being neutral as a servant leader is really critical in that role. I had a team that I worked with. It was 6 people. They were divided into technically kind of 2 separate areas. They didn't like each other. They had all sorts of complaints about the other side. One of the days that I wasn't there to facilitate the meeting, and I kind of expected it was coming, and I expected it would occur when I wasn't there, they blew up and yelled at each other, and half the room got up and left in a huff, and they were all pissed off. And so I took half of the people that day out to lunch, and I said, tell me what's wrong with the other side. And they bitched and bitched and bitched and bitched. And then I said, let me tell you what I think they're going to say about you. And I bitched and bitched and bitched and bitched. And then I said, are my statements accurate? Are you willing to cop to what I said? And they said, yeah, that's kind of accurate. So then I took the other side out the next day to lunch and had the same conversation, let them complain. And then I complained about them and asked them if it was legitimate. Those complaints actually were grounded. And eventually they said yes. And then in the next meeting where we were all together, I said, we are about to embark on a project to rip out the guts of something and do a job that's better than we've ever done before. And we can't do it with you guys fighting. And all of your complaints, while grounded for the most part, need to be fixed. And I will argue also, some of your complaints that some of the junior members aren't as good as some of the senior members places the emphasis on the senior members helping the junior members, which you haven't done, which is my biggest criticism of all of you. So what do you want to do? You want to work together to make something fundamentally good, or do you want to keep warring? And seriously, tell me. And they said, all right, we'll work together. And honestly, most of that animosity dropped off in the next week or two. And they did deliver before the date we said we were going to for something that was far better than I ever expected. It was fantastically good. We ripped out a Google subsystem and replaced it with a homegrown thing that was better than what they had. But that wouldn't have happened without basically confronting them with the truth of what they were saying and kind of the hypocrisy of that. So sometimes, we have those conversations. I interviewed at Nordstrom a while ago, and I heard an interesting story from the guy that was at Nordstrom. He said he had spent 4 years working on a project, and it was really grueling, long hours. They finally got it done, and he was burned out. He didn't know if he wanted to quit the industry or just Nordstrom or life. He decided he was going to go to a cabin in Oregon for a month and then wake up every day and wander the woods in a daze and figure it all out. And initially, what he came to the conclusion of was it's all kind of pointless, which is, in a couple of years, because they did something that had never really been done in the retail industry about combining subsystems to make it really simple for a customer. And he said, what we did was great and it really helped customers. But, I started thinking in a couple of years, it's going to be less useful. A couple more, it's going to be kind of in maintenance mode. And a couple of years after that, we're going to be replacing it again. And that just seems like such a waste. Like I spent 4 years of my life just, working so hard on this thing. And I think, in 10 years that none of that will matter. But that was the midpoint when he was kind of at the lowest point of despair during his reconciliation with his life. And towards the end, he came to a better epiphany, which was actually, it was well worthwhile, because he started thinking about all of the people he had touched, all of the difference he had made to the people in the process, the people who had been promoted, the people who had grown as a result of his mentoring and helping and everything else. And he said, every job I've ever had, I've done my best to improve the lives of those that work with me. And that's why I do what I do, not the end point, which is how I get paid. But the thing that actually is fulfilling is who I've impacted. And I agree with that completely. And I I will censor the specifics of this last little anecdote. There was a guy that used to be the building manager for the company or for the building I worked in. His name was Curtis, and he would come up every day, come into the office and talk with us. And he fixed toilets and did electrical work and plumbing and all sorts of other stuff. But he was a smart guy, and he said, I want to get into computers. And he would tell us this every day. This went on for months. Like, yeah, I really want to get into computers. Really want to get into computers. So I finally said to him, Curtis, I'm going to give you two alternative kind of paths. Okay. There's something similar between them, and there's something different. So the first one is shut the hell up. And the second is shut the hell up and do something. Now, the similarity is shut the hell up. And the difference is do something. So which one do you want to do? And he said, he got all mad and he said, what am I supposed to do? And I said, you go to Bellevue Community College, you sign up for the C programming course. All of us here will help you with your homework. Promise, we will all dedicate ourselves to helping you get through that class. I know you can do it. On the week, you're single and you're free. So get a job working for Egghead Software on the weekends. Learn how the industry works in terms of selling stuff, right? It makes some extra money. You could probably use it. Go do those things. And I gave him a book called Data Structures in C, one of the best books I ever read on programming. And I said, as you're going through this course, read this cover to cover, come back when you're done. So time goes by, and he gets a job working for Asymmetrics, which was a Paul Allen company at the time, and then segued that into a job at Microsoft, where he stayed for many years doing development and test work. So I went back to Microsoft full time, and the day that I rejoined, I got a mail the first day, which was from Curtis, that said, come downstairs. And I looked up his room, and it was directly below me. He was working in the same building. I didn't know it. And I walked in the door, and he threw this book at me, and he said, do you remember this? And it was the book I had told him to read cover to cover. And I said, yeah, I remember this. It's a great book. And he said, yeah, I've always had this in my office to remind me of how I got here. And I wanted to say thanks again for changing my life. So the reason I tell that story is not to tell you how great it was of what I did, but rather to tell you that all of us, every single day, have the opportunity to affect people in that way. I really, truly believe that. You all can do it, right? I mean, did I know that he was going to go take the class and, that he was actually going to become successful in the industry? No, but I pushed him. And sometimes that's what a servant leader does. Makes people stop and ask themselves, is that really true? So maybe I'll tell you sometime about the interview in which I got a call the next morning from the hiring manager who said I'd asked too many questions, and as a result, he decided to quit and he wouldn't hire me. So and that's a true story. So the next thing that I do is a facilitator. A facilitator is somebody who is agnostic to what's going on, is agnostic to kind of the technical depth of what people are talking about. They're there to just make sure an event or a process moves smoothly. A facilitator will help to make sure that you stay on subject when you're having a conversation in a meeting, or make sure the minutes go out on time and those kinds of things. That's there's not a lot to facilitation, because you're basically pulling yourself out of the meat of the problem. Teacher, however, is something that you do, and teaching is where you have specific in-depth knowledge that you are passing on to others. So from my perspective as a Agile coach or a Scrum Master, what I'm going to teach you is the process, how that process works together. Each of the pieces may seem independent, but they actually work together very closely to get you to a point where the sum of all that is so much better than the individual pieces. And I'll teach you how it works. And this is more about, I have subject matter expertise, and I tell you about it. So an example of this was that we had, so I worked on a thing called Direct Access at Microsoft, and it was me and 4 other guys, and it was fundamentally different than anything they had done. to give you an idea of how direct access works, you open up your laptop and you log in. That's the entire user experience. And you say, well, I do that every day. Except that what you don't do every day is connect to anybody or any corporation seamlessly without having to do any more work. So whether you were sitting in your office at Microsoft or a coffee shop in Beijing, all you did was log in and connect up. It would seem like you were sitting in your office. You didn't have a VPN, you didn't have extra credentials, you just logged into your computer, and regardless of where you were, it just worked. When we started doing an update to the operating system, there were a number of, we found that a lot of the people liked this feature so much that they wouldn't upgrade the client without that feature. Now, we have to internally validate this stuff, and I'll get to dog fooding in the future in a little bit, but we have to validate this. We have to have people internally using this at a high enough rate to be able to say it works or it doesn't work, and nobody wanted to upgrade. So one of the biggest challenges was that in the Far East, we had no presence, so we needed to take servers and install them in the data centers and enable it for the regional data centers. We ordered the same exact machines on exactly the same day with the same price and the same configuration to be delivered to the same place the same day, and they delivered one. And the guy that was in charge of this would send out mail and he'd get a bunch of BS back, and he'd send out some mail and he'd get a bunch of BS back, and he said, I don't know how to fix this. And I said, I can show you how. This is where the teacher part comes in. So I said, I'll write the mail. And the mail basically said, here's the current problem. We don't have two machines in the regional data centers. We have to for redundancy. If one goes down, we have to have the other one available. So we can't deploy without it. We only have one machine. That's the problem. And the impact of this will be failure to validate somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 client machines, which will impact the release date of the operating system by 3 to 6 months. What are you going to do? What I got back was a very long email about all sorts of things, which I didn't read, and a whole bunch of people on the 2 line and the CC line. And I took everybody off the 2 line and put them on the CC line. And I put the person who responded to me's boss on the 2 line, and I sent it to her boss with one word, again. And I got back more people on the 2 line and more people on the CC line and a bigger mail that explained all sorts of complicated things. And I replaced her like I did before, and I put her boss on the line with one word, again. And I just incrementally worked up the chain as fast as they would respond. I wouldn't even read it. I would just forward it on to their boss and say again, until it got up to an executive vice president who responded with, a replacement must be racked and stacked in 20 minutes or you're getting fired. Because that guy knew the implication of not validating those clients and the loss of revenue for 3 to 6 months slipped. I mean, it was just, to me, the equation is simple. You're losing millions of dollars because we have one machine no one can put in place. And the entire process took a day. Just, okay, I got another mail. Again, I just send it off to the next line up. Again, until it hit home, and then it got fixed. And it did. They racked and stacked and fixed the problem in a very short period of time, and data started flowing, and we were through that problem. And this is where I, went back to me and said, that's how you do this. You make sure that your message is clear. Here's the problem. Here's the impact. I need you to fix this. And you include the trail of people who didn't fix it. They don't want to be involved. So they're going to pass it on until it gets to someone who won't allow that to happen. The buck stopped finally, and the problem got fixed very quickly. I said, you don't often want to do this, but here's a case where I promise you that if 50,000 client machines didn't get deployed because you didn't know how to get people to rack and stack machines, they'd be looking for you. And, so figure out how to get out of that position of visibility by fixing the problem. So that's an issue of kind of teaching. But part of what you do as a Scrum Master is you teach people to actually not take everything so seriously sometimes, just have fun. And each of us were assigned, it was an open plan at Concur, but each of us had kind of a closed office area in which we could have a team room. And somebody came in one day and said, hey, that other team room has a plant. Like, we don't have a plant. So the next day they came in and there were like 4 or 5 big potted plants in the room. And I said, there, we outclassed them. We have a lot of plants. And then somebody came like a day or two later and said, these guys have a sound system. So the next day we had a better sound system. And then somebody said, I think that we've kind of beaten them. And I said, no. So the next day they came in and there was a disco ball with a light that I had bought from Amazon. So we had music playing and a disco ball going, and we had a little bit of dancing before we started our morning meeting like we normally did. And that kind of stuff just lightens everybody up. You know, what was the cost? Minimal, honestly. And yet people had fun. Like, I guess we can have a disco ball and still get work done. So I just recently threw that thing out too. It was just taking up too much room. So mentor is, I have knowledge and I'm going to help you figure out the best path forward for you, which is a little different from teaching. Teaching is, I'm just going to tell you the principles. Mentor is I'm going to work with you to enable those principles. And in a minute, we'll get to coach and the differentiation between the three. But one of the definitions I read on mentor is it's a wise and trusted counselor or teacher, you know, and immediately I think of Yoda, you know, like, wise counselor am I? So mentor is kind of in that mode. And there's a term that you hear periodically in agile circles, which is shuhari. For those of you who do martial arts, it's actually a Japanese thing. Shuhari are the 3 stages to learning a martial art. Shu is I teach you the basics. You follow the rules, you do the kata, you learn how to do it. Ha is where you start learning how to put it all together and it starts to flow fairly seamlessly. And Ri is where you step outside of that and now you're no longer thinking of techniques or anything else. You just naturally react and you may invent something in that process that doesn't exist in the standard rules. You go beyond the rules and you take it on. Interestingly, in Aikido, you start out with a white belt, and by the time you've reached 8th Dan black belt, you have an actual white belt again, which is to remind you that you are always right back at the beginning learning new things. You can't get satisfied because you finally got your black belt 8th Dan. You're still basically a white belt. So when I was coaching a guy to become an agile coach, a guy named Patrick, we would meet once a week and we'd go through kind of like what he was working on, what I was working on. And coaching was that we both attended each other's events for all of our teams so that we could see how each other did it and learn from each other. Part of coaching is to be open to learn from other people that you're coaching. And we sat down one day and I said, I'm going to give you an assignment for next week. And it's going to be the first thing I'm going to ask you about. And if you don't deliver on that subject, the meeting is over until next week. And what I want you to do next week, first thing, is tell me something I don't know that truly helps me in the work I do every day. You know what I do every day. You know the teams I work with. You have to bring me something I don't know that helps me. And the reason I'm making you do this is because that actually is what a coach does. You're going to coach me. You're going to give me something more than I have. So a week later, we sat down. He had this smile on his face. He goes, I know what you're going to ask. I think I've got something. And he did. It was great. It was exactly what I needed. And so sometimes, you know, coaching is a two-way street. You are getting the same. You're getting something from the person that you're coaching at the same time you're coaching them. Now, in terms of teacher, mentor, and coach, teaching is I'm going to tell you something that you don't have expertise in so that you at least are aware of how it works. Mentoring is then to work with you to figure out how you fit into it, how best you can work with it. And then coaching is to step outside of that to say, you already know how to do it. Can we let's figure out a really good path for you and your team to really optimize this. Like I don't tell you, I think you should do this or I think you should do that. When I'm a coach, I say, here's some things we should consider. Have you ever thought about this? You know, I've gone into meetings where I truly had no idea what I was talking about going in. But I started asking some questions that forced people to go, yeah, okay, let me explain it to you. And in the process of explaining it to me, they might get hit by something and say, okay, I understand better. And I think I have a really good solution for it. I forgot to bring up the slide that shows coach. And some of the people in this particular meeting know exactly what that is. And others might not see how it quite relates to coach. But I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. So the one story that I had told Ken in the coaching realm along these lines was that every sprint, every 2 weeks, we gather metrics that say how they did. And for 4 sprints in a row, so 2 months, they had gone progressively down in what they produced. And in this next planning session, they're talking about pulling in more than they ever have done before, with an absolutely clear trend line of going down every single 2 weeks. And I said, there's no way. There's no way you can do this. I don't believe it for a second. The trend line shows you can't. You've never done this before, and certainly haven't done anything even vaguely like it. You've done 1/3 of what you're claiming that you're going to do this next time in this most recent one. And they kept telling me, no, they do it. And I said, I've heard all this before, but the metrics show you've never done this. And they said, we can get it done. So I finally said to them, all right, I'll tell you what, if you all commit to that goal and you fail to do it, then I do your planning for the next month or 2. Like I'll set the bar, because I'm going to set the bar low, because this is what I'm seeing right now. And someone in the meeting said, well, what if we do it? And I said, I'll buy you all pizza for lunch. And I don't mean one pizza or crappy pizza. I mean like really good stuff from Pagliacci, enough that you can all eat, as much as you want, and there'll be pizza left over. And somebody said, oh, you're going to get the company to pay for it. And I said, no, I didn't tell you the company committed to that. I told you that I committed to that. I'm going to try to get the company to pay for it. But my commitment to you is, if you pulled this off, I will buy you pizza. If the company pays me, that's nice, but that's my commitment to you. And the reason is, if I was betting on a horse, you'd be the last one I'd bet on based on the current metrics. Really, you haven't delivered. So it's a pretty easy bet. Like the horse has has lost every single race for 2 months and is destined for the glue factory. Do I really want to bet on that one? No. So, but I did put one caveat in there. I said, what we do is sustainable. You cannot work more than 40 hours. You have to all promise you won't work more than 40 hours. That's the sustainable pace. And they agreed to it, and they pulled it off. There was one piece they couldn't finish, but it was a dependency that was external and it wasn't their fault. And so I went and got pizza, and lucky for me, the company did pay for it. So we're all sitting around having lunch, and everybody's had a couple of pieces and it's slowing down. And I said, I think some of you know that I oftentimes have ulterior motives. So I want to tell you why I did what I just did, because I actually kind of figured you could get it done. But to do that, you had to do something different than you've ever done before. And so what I'd like you to do is just go around the table. And as we go around the table, tell me what thing or things you did differently this time, and whether it's sustainable. If you did something that's not sustainable, well, we can't take that into account. But if you did do something that is sustainable, then my next question is, why have you never done this before? And so we went around the room, and everybody was totally open about it. And people actually exposed that one of the reasons, for example, they didn't do something was that they thought they had to get permission from like the manager before they could do certain things, and that held them back in time. The manager said, I've never told you had to ask me for this stuff. I was always wondering why you asked me. Like, just go do it. So it was little stuff like that had been holding them back, that they hadn't actually discussed amongst themselves. And when it finally came to the dev manager, he was the last one. He said something that I absolutely never thought that he'd ever say, but I knew. He said, I padded all my estimates, So I looked like a hero. So I would get stuff done sooner, but I never delivered on those, which then hurt us in terms of the final point count at the end. That's why we don't finish things, because I actually lie about how long it's going to take to try to look better than everybody else. And when I figured out that that's what I did, I decided to stop doing that. And based on that, we actually got it all done. And I said, okay, so being that we have a number of things that are sustainable, do you think you can commit to sustain those things? The productivity went above 50% on average for the level that they said, like the highest level that they met for that sprint. They went 50% above that on a regular basis from that point on. It cleared all of those little problems they were having that they either didn't recognize or didn't want to admit to or didn't want to go solve. And we didn't work more than 40 hours, and the productivity went through the roof, honestly, because they finally confronted what was really holding them back, which was them. Now, did I tell them how to fix any of those problems? I put them in a position in which they had to solve it to meet a goal. And this isn't actually in my little script here, but I wanted to say one other thing. There was a guy who took over a semiconductor company years ago, and nobody was on the same page. So he made a giant poster that he put in the fab that showed what the percentage of chips that they built actually worked. And then he had a line, which was the line of the percentage of working semiconductors that their competitors did on a regular basis. And he said he plotted every single week the percentage of working semiconductors on this graph. And he said it didn't really rise all that much. And then it started to rise, and then it went above the industry average. And he said, I liken it to three possible worlds, one in which there are no street signs and no cops, one of which there is street signs and cops, and one in which there are just street signs. So with no street signs, you just wander around looking for your destination. With cops and street signs, you get conflicting answers and lots of additional driving around because they don't necessarily agree. But if I have just street signs, you can pick your own path to the destination. And by having that metric, that very simple, visible metric every day, this is the work that you're doing against the industry standard. These other guys are going to eat our lunch if we don't fix this problem. Now, he met with other people and worked through some of the issues. But he said the impetus for having them call him into a meeting was that they knew they had to meet that line or they were out of business. He didn't even articulate that as the problem. He just had the poster and let people figure it out for themselves. And then they started fixing their own problems because they knew what was on the line, the company and their jobs. And it worked really, really well. Sometimes that transparency, can be as simple as something like that. Manager. And yeah, I know he was the creative director and all that kind of stuff, but for those of you who know Mad Men. But one of the things about being a manager within agility is kind of connected to that. You don't have a job title. There's a scaled version of Agile. It's called SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, which is to bring many, many Agile teams together to work on a larger project that's also Agile. And SAFe talks about the two kind of hierarchies within an organization. There's the vertical hierarchy, you're in test, you're in, IT, you're in HR, whatever. And then there's the horizontal, which is you have to work with people across teams to accomplish work. And both of those are appropriate. But a Scrum Master, especially in the role of servant leader, tends to work very horizontally and rarely vertically. As you can tell from some of my previous examples, I actually do not care what your job title is. I'm not bothered by that. I will do what I need to do to get things working. And that's kind of the management perspective for Agilists, which is I work horizontally, in large part. And one of those examples of kind of that management side of things is I joined a team. So the concept of dog fooding in software is that you have to use your own software for some period of time before you release it. So think operating system. You need to have people in the company actually using it, validating the problems before you ship it. You go fix all the things you find internally before. They have to be able to solve their day-to-day problems with your operating system before you ship it out. And that's called dog fooding. And it comes from a slightly untrue story about how a manager of a dog food company would periodically go down to the line, open up a can at random, take a couple of scoops and eat it, and say, if my dog food is good enough, I can eat, a couple of spoonfuls, on a regular basis. I made that as part of a letter that I sent out one time, and someone responded with, actually, my dad was at that company at the time, and I can tell you that's not completely accurate. So he corrected me. But the idea is when you hear dog food, you're thinking about internal validation of stuff. And I joined a team that was doing the dog fooding of one of the server releases for Microsoft. So think about upgrades of hardware and software at the level of 10,000 machines a day across 138 shared goals across all the product groups within the operating system division. I joined as the 7th member of a team of 6, and within a week, all of them quit. So I was running a project with 138 shared goals with me. And how do you fix that problem? Well, the first thing you do is you go find a project manager that you absolutely trust, that doesn't take crap from anybody. And as a contractor, I can defend her to go do the right thing. So I hired her. Her name was Janine. And we set up a meeting every day at 8 o'clock, which started quite literally at 8 o'clock and not a second later, which lasted no more than 15 minutes. The message would go out the night before in the form of an agenda that would say, here are the 1 to 3 teams we need to hear from with these specific questions. We'll have, a parking lot afterwards in case there's more we need to talk about. If you were on the agenda for the next day, you must show up, and the product group will be there to validate what you say. Every single day for months, 8 o'clock on the dot, the meeting started and it ended in 15 minutes or less, oftentimes less. Because I can't scale to 138 teams with me and a contractor unless we do it this way. Now, for the first week and a half, I would get mails that would be, oh yeah, man, sorry, I showed up late and it looked like the meeting was over. Can you give me a recap of what happened? No. And I would always say, I can't scale to do this. I can't cater to you. You are one of 138 I have to deal with. Fix the problem, show up on time. And my promise to you is it'll be less than 15 minutes and it's all a phone call. So there's no reason you can't attend, especially if you're on the line, because as soon as you fail to deliver the information I need, I report it to the product group that comes and makes your life miserable. So it's easy to just answer the questions and we move on to the next thing. So like clockwork, and I owe my life to Janine on those days. So we chunked through this work for months on end and ended up pulling it off. We actually pulled it off. But how do you manage a huge project when everybody's quit but you? You have to ratchet down on your willingness to cater to everybody. But eventually people said it was one of the best things they had dealt with because it was short and and Janine did so much of the groundwork on this, just making sure that every day when we sent out the agenda, it was clear and people appreciated it and it worked really well. So another thing that I do, so I do assessments of teams, and when I joined and just to make it clear, I worked through Insight Global, through a company called Cisco, to Bank of America. So if you ask Bank of America who I work for, they say Cisco. If you ask Cisco who I work for, it's Insight Global. If you ask who pays my check, it's Insight Global. If you ask where I show up every day virtually, it's Bank of America. If that isn't totally confusing, then that's cool, but that's what I deal with every day. So after I had joined the teams, and I was there for a little while, I did metrics on the last month or so, 2 months, I guess, kind of give me a graph of the work that everybody's done. And then I sorted it high to low. And I went to my manager and I said, here's the little, histogram, high to low of productivity. And I circled the 3 bottom people and I said, is this a surprise to you? And he said, oh no, they're the least productive. And I said, what are we doing about them? He goes, what do you mean? I said, are we mentoring them? Are we helping them? Or are we firing them? Or what? Because we can't, to get this work done, we can't have people that low on the pole. And so we talked about whether they were recoverable or not, and we ended up keeping one, and he got much better, and the other two went away, and that's kind of a natural. There are other reasons for that, but that's what happened. And then I circled the high end, and I said, "What are we doing about those?" He goes, "What do you mean? They're the most productive people." And I said, "They are, but do they have redundancy, or have you made them the most productive by repeatedly assigning them the same work, so that they're really, really good at that, and no one else is good at that?" So I will just ask about these three people. Tell me what happens when each of them leaves. And the reality was, if any of them left, they were screwed, which happened the next day. One of them quit. So, and for different reasons. He had something else to do in life, but he left. And, kind of drive home that point of, I'm thinking about all the members of the team and how as a whole we can work together to both bring up those that are on the low end and create redundancy, so we're not screwed. We have that redundancy. One of the things I invented when I was at Microsoft was called once, twice, three shoot estimation, which is all of the work that we did could be measured roughly in 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. So I'd get all my leads together, and they'd put their hands behind their back, and I'd go once, twice, three shoot, and they'd throw out 1 to 4 fingers showing what they thought was the time duration for this. If you got, say, like 2, 2, 3, 3, you'd have this quick conversation of, let's call it a 3 or let's call it a 2. We'd come to an agreement. If it was like a 1s and 4s, then you say, why do you think it's so easy, and why do you think it's so hard? And that discussion on the surface brings you to a point where you say, okay, I think this is the real estimate. But that's not the biggest benefit of that. The biggest benefit of that is you now know a lot about the area, because you to make an estimate, you had to ask some questions. You now know a lot about the area that the other people are working on. You start having real redundancy. You can start swapping people between teams because you understand where the load really is needing to be lessened. And this came to pass when I was walking out one evening. It was about 7:30, and I heard one of my leads talking to another one in a room, and I came in and they were all sitting together. They never told me. They didn't invite me. They were all just sitting there talking about how to solve the problem of capacity, to solve what they saw was the problem of not being able to finish some of the work that they need. They worked together without involving me at all to work through that, because they all kind of understood each other's work and truly wanted to work together as a team. So impediment remover. Like I said, blocks are individuals, impediments are team related. And one of those questions is this something I can fix for you, or can you do it yourself? It's not that I'm not willing to help, but impediments are, large problems that we have to go solve. And, do we really have to remove it? Is it really a problem? And there's a thing called the theory of constraints. And the theory of constraints says that if you have a number of constraints, one of the first things you have to do is identify which is your biggest one. Because if you don't know what your biggest one is, removing all the others will have no bearing on the outcome. And so after you do an assessment, and the assessment is sit down for 2 weeks and don't say a word and just listen to everybody, come up with some hypotheses, play it back against the people in the team and ask them, is this true? Is it not true? And then you eventually come to recommendations for the team and how to go fix the fundamental problem. If you don't then do an assessment of what's the biggest problem for them, you won't get a very positive outcome, because they're like, one of the biggest problems that we had initially with the groups that I worked with is all of the stories that they worked on were just terrible. They weren't useful. People didn't understand them. Somebody said, as soon as we're done with planning, I go ask somebody, what did that mean? And they didn't even get anything out of planning. So let's fix the stories. And out of that come a number of other solutions that are related to it. So part of what you have to do as an impediment remover is figure out your biggest impediment, go work on that. And finally, change agent. So you are a catalyst for change. You are someone who makes sometimes very subtle suggestions and things like that. And this goes back to the preamble, which is before people even know I'm involved, they find out things got fixed. And it's kind of a thankless job. You quietly go fix things and take no credit for it. I can tell you that in a Zen temple in Japan, that when you go to help somebody, you're ideally not supposed to ever let them know it was you. You remove yourself from the equation and you just go help them. You go fix something and you slide it back in when they're not looking, so they didn't know it was you. So there's no one to thank. They are grateful, but they don't thank anyone. Your ego doesn't get involved. And that's sometimes what the change agent does, which is I'm going to quietly affect some change. So I have two last stories about this. So there's a guy named Matt, one of the best developers I've ever met. I have never seen anybody type so fast. He could type a long line of complex characters in code faster than I could type my own name. And it was dead on accurate. And he was really, really good at what he did. But he also, in the interview process, had undersold himself and was not being paid what he was worth. And I knew this, and I knew that he was a flight risk because we weren't paying him enough. So I lobbied heavily for an out-of-band promotion and a raise, and I secured this. But I knew it was coming for quite some time because I had to work for a while with his manager, his skip level, and the vice president to get this to occur. And my motivation was, he is one of the best people you have, and we can't afford to lose him, but you're underpaying him and we need to fix it. I never told him any of this stuff directly. So he came to me one day and he says, "Hey, I really got to talk to you." And I said, "I know, I'm really busy today. I'll find you later." I very purposely avoided him all day just to jerk him around. So about 5 o'clock, I go and I find him. I said, "There, I got some time. What do you got?" And he goes, "Oh my God, I've looked for you everywhere. I have to tell you something." And I said, "No, I know what it is." He goes, "No, you don't." I said, "Yeah, you got promoted out of band. You got a really good raise and you got a promotion." He goes, "Yeah." So what, Janine told you? No. Amir told you? No. Simon told you? That's the vice president. No. Zach told you, his best friend? I said, "No, I knew. You couldn't have known. I've known for 3 months." "How would you know for 3 months?" "Because I'm the one that made it happen." And then I explained to him what I had done. And he said, "Oh, that's bullshit, man. You didn't have anything to do with it." And I said, "I knew you'd say that. So I'm going to prove to you that's not true. Remember 3 months ago when we were trap shooting? And I asked you, if you got promoted out of band and got a raise, would you finally buy a decent over-under shotgun instead of that junky Remington 870, which is actually not made for trap?" "Yeah, I remember that conversation." I said, "That's when I knew." He said, "That was 3 months ago." I said, "That's my point." He goes, "Yeah, but why did you tell me then?" "Because I knew you wouldn't believe me today." So I put a placeholder in there to tell you 3 months in the future that I knew you were going to get promoted because I knew you wouldn't believe me. And then he said, "I'll be honest with you. I don't know what you do or how you do it, but I do know when you're around, my life is better." That is the best thing you can hear as a servant leader, as a change agent. Like, they didn't know you were there. Things just got better and they were happy about it. And the absolute last story is where the cake, for those of you who have played Portal, I said the cake is not a lie. There was a guy on a team named Cody. So what this team had done was replace the entire back end overnight. I mean, they had spent months and months working on this back end. And then in a flip of a switch, they replaced the entire back end for a website with something else, and no one noticed. Absolutely no one noticed. That's phenomenal work. But in terms of the customer experience, it's no different. It looks exactly the same. It just runs a lot faster and it's a lot more flexible. They don't care. They didn't see that. So Cody was running around bitching that nobody had appreciated the work they had done. And I said, and he was causing a lot of trouble. People were getting a little irritated by him, and he was kind of disruptive. And I knew he was doing it, but he wouldn't come forward and say it. So we had a retrospective like we do every 2 weeks. And I said, I will raise a point that someone has been running around complaining that you guys didn't get recognized for this. And I know who you are, but I won't name you. But I do want to say that we need to end this conversation here, which is it's causing problems for other people on the team. And this is the place where we openly discuss these problems. So I will leave it to you to decide if you want to discuss it, whoever you might be, because the next step, if you don't, is I talk to your manager and we have a very different conversation. It's up to you. It really it is. We're open to the complaint. Then Cody says, okay, it was me. And I said, I know. And he goes, I know you know. You always know. And I said, so what's the complaint? He goes, nobody thanked us. I said, well, let me remind you, the president sent company-wide a mail talking about what we did. The vice president of platforms sent out a mail right after that explaining the impact of what we did, that it's now flexible and easier to use and faster and cheaper and all this other kind of stuff. And for me, that's high praise coming from those two. That is sufficient for me, but clearly it's not sufficient for you. What do you think constitutes being thanked? He goes, when you ship something like that, you get something for it. And I said, like? He goes, a cake or a pizza. And I said, do you want both? He goes, no, I'd like one. I said, well, which would you like, a cake or a pizza? He goes, I'll take a cake. I said, so I get a cake and you shut up about this, right? And he goes, yeah, I shut up about it. I just want a cake. I said, okay. And everybody laughed, thinking that I was just jerking him around. As soon as the meeting was over, I went to Safeway and I bought a cake and I had it decorated. And I brought it up to the team who was all still in the area. I said, everybody gather around. Cody said he wanted to be recognized and the cake would do it. So I bought you all a cake and we're all going to eat some. I also bought some stuff to drink. And I opened up the box and it said on the top, now Cody, shut up. and but the impact of that was that Cody never again complained about not being recognized or behind the scenes groused for too long, just complaining about kind of random stuff. He knew that that would come to light and that he'd have to deal with it. And he started opening up in retrospectives and admitting when he was pissed off about something and we could actually fix it. And what do you know? He didn't get in trouble for it and it fixed the problem. And people later said to me, yeah, but wasn't that kind of dumb? Like, did you really have to buy a cake for the guy? I said, wait a second. My understanding of success was the emails from the president and the vice president. But I don't know what constitutes that for him. And the cost of that cake was compensated for by someone who no longer caused trouble in the group or, caused us to be less effective or anything like that. Honestly, that was super cheap. Oh, but you had the company pay for it. No, this time I didn't. I just wanted Cody to shut up. So anyway, that's kind of the summary of my talk. And I wasn't looking at the time, so I'm hoping it isn't too much past.
That was really good, Mark. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Yeah, you did a great job. By the way, I wanted to let everybody know in the chat window, you have to copy it now. There's a link to a CEU certificate and a survey. So you can get your CEU hours by just clicking the link that's in the survey in the chat window. And also click the link for survey. If you're not going to click them now, then at least save the links. And, but you have to copy and paste them now because once this meeting is shut off, you can't copy those links anymore. So they should be there. If anyone needs them, they're there. Some people like printing the CEUs for when they do their recertifications or whatever, or they're getting certified, but it's all there just in case you need it. And we'll stay on and network for whoever else wants to network for a little bit, and then we'll call it a day. But Mark, you did a great job, man. This is great. I love how you interspersed real stories with your knowledge, which was important because then you can relate to, okay, that's what it is, and this is how you do it, or how you did it at least, which was great. And plus they were entertaining in many ways. So I appreciate it. Yeah, that was great, dude. Good job.
I've been through some weird stuff, so I have a few stories.
Yeah, well, you did a great job. So thank you so much, man. And we're gonna have to have you back again sometime. So that was great. Thank you again. If anyone has any questions for Mark, hit him up now while we're all on.
And I'm also on LinkedIn, so if you have questions after the fact, honestly, part of what a coach or senior coach should do is have a zone of control that's industry-wide, as opposed, as a scrum master, you work on a team. As a coach, you work within a division. As a senior coach, you tend to work across the industry. So part of what I do is help people that I don't work with directly. If they have questions about Agile, I'll do my best to answer them. So
Yeah, that's great, man. That's great. Does anyone have any questions regarding leadership, Scrum, Agile? For Mark, while you have the expert on the line, he is here to answer your questions on leadership or Scrum or Agile. If you want to get certified, he can tell you about how to do that.
I do want to say that Abinant, who's since left, came to me one day and he said, by the way, I think I want to change a little bit of my direction. I think I want to become a product owner. And I said, I'll give you a link to scrum.org specifically to be able to figure out where the training is. And then you can, and this is on a Thursday. And I said, you can decide what class you want to take and that. And he said, do you have any recommendations? And I said, Mike Cohn is well known throughout the world for Agile, and he does teach these classes. So if he was available, I'd pick him. So Abedin comes in on Monday morning and he said, hey, by the way, I just got my CSPO certificate. And I said, I talked to you on Thursday. He goes, yeah, I did it over the weekend. So
Wow.
it was like, holy crap, that's cool. I didn't think I was that influential. So yeah.
Well, you get stuff done, man. I'll tell you, one way or the other. And it's usually the good way. So I like it. That's awesome. Any other questions for Mighty Mark while we have him? The expert is on the line, waiting for you to hit him up with a question.
Yes, thank you, Mark. It was a great talk. I was really inspired. What is the organization you would recommend to get the Scrum Master certificate?
Scrum.org is one of the places you can go. You'll find there's training in there. And typically you can, because a lot of them are virtual, you can pick those, anytime they're available. But if it has to be regional, if you want to actually go to a place, they have filters that allow you to, pick where you are. So scrum.org. If you can't find what you're looking for, there are other places you can go to find lists of training. Just hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll help you find them.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Mark. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Awesome. Any other questions, folks? If not, we're all set. So Mark, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. It's, amazing. You are awesome. And hopefully everyone learned the Markisms today,
And I even kept it clean. So that's another huge milestone.
And we do appreciate that. That's awesome.
Thank
Good
you,
stuff.
Ma. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
Agnes, for coming.
yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all, and appreciate it. Okay.
Awesome. Awesome.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody. All right. Well, I will end the meeting then. Thank you again. Boy, Mark, you are really awesome expert. Appreciate your help, and your presentation style was awesome. I'm sure the surveys are all going to be A+. So nice job, dude.
Well, if not, I will do inspect and adapt and figure out how to do a better job the next time.
You will, won't you? And
As
we'll
long
get
as
you a cake.
Yeah, as long as you're transparent, then I can do that.
I love it. You're the best. All right, man. Thank you again, and everyone have a great night.
Great, thank you.
Okay, bye, Al.
Thank you very much. Bye.